Greetings and welcome to the Talk with History podcast. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we talk about history's continuing impact on us and our personal journey through YouTube as we continue to explore, record, and share our history walks with you. Now, Jen, before we start into the podcast today, I want to get to our 5-star question and reviews of the week. So this week, we don't have any questions, but we actually did get some 5-star reviews.
Woohoo!
So I want to give a shout out to a couple of our reviewers, and some of them, if I am messing up the names, then I apologize because the names that you left on Apple Podcasts are a bunch of letters and numbers. So first one here is just someone said, hey, this is a great variety of topics. These podcasts are a great way to learn on my daily commute. So much that I wasn't aware of, and the hosts are wonderfully entertaining.
Aw.
That's very nice. So thank you to Coco Livy. I'm just going to... So thank you to Coco Livy there. The next 5-star review said, the subject is, I love the variety. They are not pigeonholed to any one type of historical era or subject. I've learned a lot. Great podcasts and episodes. And that is from SJBTMS.
Cool.
So thank you to SJBTMS. And one more from someone that you may know. This is a 5-star review. The subject is History Made Interesting. I'm not typically a history fan, but I love Talk with History. That is from Alley Girl 510.
Yeah, I know her.
Yes, you do know her. So again, thank you to those three for leaving us some 5-star reviews. We truly appreciate it, and it does help the show. For anybody else listening, if you guys want to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or share the podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. Also, don't forget to check out our other podcast, The History Buzz, where we interview folks while chatting about history over a couple of drinks, and we let that conversation wander where it may. So you may not have thought of graveyards as a place of history, but with just a little bit of research, you'd be surprised at what historical figures are resting in your local area cemetery. This kind of curiosity and other YouTube channels like our friends over at Whitdock Cemetery Tours and the History Hunters brought us to Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland, Ohio. So Jen, why don't you tell us about Lakeview Cemetery and who we visited there?
Sure. So what opened us up to this cemetery? Because cemeteries, since doing this video, we have ventured more into cemetery tours because we found them so interesting and had so much history in them. But what brought us to this cemetery was President Garfield, 20th President of the United States. I worked at the James Garfield House in Mentor, Ohio. The James Garfield House was James Garfield's summer home in Ohio. It was like a farmhouse. He lived there while he was president. He had bought it before he was president. And after he was assassinated, his family continued to live there. So I had worked there. I did an internship with the National Park Service. And when doing that internship, everyone would ask me, have you been to his grave? Have you been to his mausoleum?
And you mentioned that to me a couple times, like that you wanted to go visit it.
And so it's not close by. Mentor is about halfway between where we lived in Erie and Cleveland, and his grave is in Cleveland. Yeah. This cemetery is in Cleveland. So we would have to make like the trip to go see it. So I had talked you into it. Let's go to the cemetery. Let's go see President Garfield. But in doing the research for who else is in Lakeview Cemetery, we were like blown away.
Yeah, and so there were some names that I even knew, a couple that I didn't, and I kind of had to be reminded.
Sure.
But to put this all in context, when Jen says, "Hey, we did more cemetery, started going to cemeteries more and did more cemetery tours," I had never once thought of going to a cemetery to like learn history.
Yeah.
Right. So there was Arlington. We had done
Arlington
just before this.
Yes.
And this was after it. And really the driver was because you were working at the James Garfield Presidential Library.
Yes.
The James Garfield House.
Yes.
And so when we finally went down there, why don't you tell our listeners about some of the other kind of larger than life historical figures that are buried at this cemetery in Cleveland.
It's amazing because if you get onto their website, they have kind of like a mission statement. And it's like Lakeview Cemetery is committed to providing interment services to all races and religions while preserving its grounds and status as a nationally recognized landmark of historical significance. Now, I just read that, and that's kind of the conclusion we come to just by being there. Just by being there, I was like, these are people of all races. These are people of all religions. These
That's
are people of all classes. I say this because the richest man in America for years is buried in Lakeview Cemetery. John D. Rockefeller is buried in Lakeview Cemetery. And then you also get like the first African-American mayor of a major city is buried in Lakeview Cemetery.
Right.
And then we're getting like a lawman, Elliot Ness, is buried in Lakeview Cemetery. So these huge historic figures are coming out at us in this one place of burial.
Yeah. And again, if you don't recognize those names right off the bat, this is John D. Rockefeller of railroads and oil and
Rockefeller Center.
Rockefeller Center in New York, like he built that.
Yeah, his son built it, but it's his money.
His money, his all his work, right? The first black mayor of a major city.
Yeah.
Elliot Ness. So if you've ever seen The Untouchables, for me, I knew Elliot Ness from a Tupac song.
Yeah. You had no idea who he was.
I had no idea, but I had actually seen the movie.
Yes.
It's a Sean Connery and Kevin Costner movie. So there's some really, not just the president, it's all these other people.
Yeah. And so it opened in 1869, and it's still in use today. It has interesting monuments. Like there was like a crying lady monument by the lake.
And that was actually a lot more famous than I realized.
Yes. And they have very interesting tombstones. Like we'll talk about Alan Freed, and his tombstone looks like a jukebox.
Yeah, the Alan Freed one was really interesting. The crying lady, so it's basically she kind of looks like an angel. I don't know if she's got the wings.
Yeah,
but for some reason it's that kind of classic kind of rusty green.
Yes,
and for some reason the patina makes it look like she's got tears. So it's very artistic and it's very emotional.
Yes,
it was. And then when I started doing the video and making this video for YouTube. I was like, this is actually really well known.
It is. And it's actually, so different cemeteries have different missions, I would say. And Lakeview Cemetery's mission is really to be in the community.
Yeah.
They want community involvement. They have a whole, and you'll see it in our video, they have a whole Daffodil Hill.
Yep.
And they want people to visit it. They want people to drive in their cemetery.
Take pictures.
They want people to walk.
Yeah.
They want people to picnic.
Yeah.
They want kids to play.
Yeah.
Like they encourage that behavior, where you'll get other cemeteries who very much discourage that behavior. Arlington is one of them. So you have to be very aware of what the cemetery's purpose and what their mission is trying to accomplish.
This was much more of, and we'll go into some of the characters, but just up front, this was much more of a tourist destination.
It is.
And even the people there, when we were walking around visiting, like they just started chatting with us.
Very friendly.
And they saw that we were making videos, and nobody was really bothered by it.
I think it was one of the first times we handed out our business card.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So Jen, who are some of the first kind of historical figures we're going to be talking a little bit about? Who do we see there?
Well, so one of the ones I really wanted to talk about was Ray Chapman. And Ray Chapman was a baseball player. He played for the Cleveland Indians, and he was the only Major League Baseball player who has died from an injury of a ball during a game. And he was hit in the head with a baseball. This is 30 years before helmets. So it's even after 30 years after he's hit and killed, they still don't introduce helmets. And he is hit by a Yankee player, a pitcher named Carl Mays. And Carl Mays had the reputation for being kind of a wild pitcher anyway. But after he kills Ray Chapman, his reputation pretty much goes downhill from there. But
and that grave, it had all sorts of stuff around it.
Baseballs and gloves.
Yeah.
And people bought pennants, Cleveland Indian pennants.
That's right.
And people those are the people who we gave our card to.
Yeah.
People were visiting that grave. So people come there for that grave. And he was only 29 years old. He was very young. And what I found interesting about him is his wife is pregnant when he dies, and she has a daughter, and she gets remarried to a man in California, and she ends up never really recovering from her husband's death, and she ends up passing away, where her husband in California just has her sent back to Cleveland and buried in Calgary Cemetery.
Huh.
And I visit Calgary Cemetery in the Cleveland Torso Killer video.
Oh.
And then the daughter, actually, she dies not long after at 8 years old from measles.
Oh my gosh.
And she's actually buried in Calvary Cemetery too. So I sometimes find it sad when families are separated. I feel like they should be buried with Ray Chapman, So that's kind of like something that I always like to look at Find a Grave and the connections people still have.
Sure.
But no, Ray Chapman is a very popular grave because he was killed by a baseball in a major league game.
And I think he was pretty close to the radio DJ.
No, the radio DJ is close to Elliot Ness.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah. So Elliot Ness, we can talk about Elliot Ness a little bit. So I was so excited.
You were so excited.
Because I loved The Untouchables. So if anyone has seen that movie with Kevin Costner and Sean Connery, to me, it's probably one of Sean Connery's best roles. He wins the Academy Award for it.
For Best Supporting Actor.
That's his only Academy Award.
Yeah.
He wins it for The Untouchables.
Yeah.
And he has the great line, we put it in the video, like, how far are you willing to go?
Yeah.
Like, you want to take down Al Capone, what are you prepared to do?
Yeah.
Because you've got to go all the way.
Yeah, that's a classic. It's a classic kind of mobster era movie, but for the cops, from the cops side, right?
Now, the sad thing about The Untouchables is most of it is highly historically inaccurate.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're actually. I mean, there was a group, right? Elliot Ness, like they were actually him and like his
so
other kind of straight stick cops.
He had a small team, and they were anti-prohibitionists. So what he did basically is he was brought in to take down Al Capone, and what they did is they basically cut out the middleman with his alcohol supply.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And they kind of show that in the movie a little bit.
Yeah.
And as they're doing that, the problem is when they try to bring him up on charges of prohibition, is the judge is paid off.
Right.
And that's what happens in real life.
Right. Because Capone had paid everybody off. Cops, judges,
so what happens is
officials.
they actually are able to bring him up on tax evasion charges. And Elliot Ness's brother works for the Treasury, and Elliot Ness is actually working for the Treasury at this time as well. And it's actually the three charges stick, and he gets sent to prison for 11 years.
Yeah.
And there is one moment when Ness and Capone actually meet. I think it's when Ness takes Capone from the jail and puts him on a plane to go to another bigger prison.
Yeah.
It's the one time they're actually like in the same space. But the whole point of The Untouchables, and this term was coined by the Chicago newspaper for the six men that Ness gets around him, is they can't be bought.
Right.
Capone can't pay them off.
Yeah.
And so they're untouchable by
And they try to share that
corruption.
in the movie.
Yeah.
They try to kind of explain why they're called the
Yeah.
Untouchables.
Yeah. And so that kind of really makes Elliot Ness's career. He moves on to Cleveland. So this is what opens us up to, like, why is he in Cleveland? Why is Elliot Ness? That made no sense. He's from Chicago, right? This whole Al Capone case is Chicago.
Yeah.
He comes to Cleveland after he's hired a safety director, and this serial killer starts operating.
Yeah,
in
which is
Cleveland.
another video.
It's another video of ours.
And we'll talk about it on another podcast.
And in long story short, is he's unsuccessful in catching him.
Yeah.
It tarnishes his career, and he ends up working for like a counterfeit company in Pennsylvania. And he dies of a heart attack, very young, 54 years old. And he dies relatively obscure. And then a book comes out about 2 years later called The Untouchables.
Yeah.
And his whole life is made. A TV show comes out,
Yeah.
a movie comes out. Elliot Ness gains notoriety. He's in a song, right? And now now he would never recognize the famousness that he has today.
Because he wasn't that famous back then. Right?
He was very tarnished and discouraged after what happens in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So and he was a alcoholic. He was drinking a lot because, again, he felt he couldn't solve that last case.
Yeah.
And he burns down that shanty town.
Yeah.
And that really just
and we'll talk about
but that's in
all that
another
stuff
video.
later.
And we'll talk about that on another podcast.
So again, we mentioned earlier that Alan Freed, his grave is like across the street. It's like right there.
So Elliot Ness, if you see his tombstone, just so we can cover Elliot Ness real fast, he's actually not buried.
That's right.
His ashes are there, and they're not actually even by the tombstone. They're in the lake.
Yeah.
And the police department spread his ashes in the lake.
Yeah, in the cemetery.
In the cemetery. Right. So the tombstone is just kind of like to mark that
it's a marker for him, yeah.
Yeah, his ashes are close by, but not actually there. And then close to that lake is also Alan Freed. And Alan Freed is the whole reason why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland.
Yep.
So he was a disc jockey to play African American music and give credit to African American artists.
Oh, I don't think I realized that.
And so he coins the term rock and roll. He comes up with that term.
Yeah.
And that is the whole reason it's in Cleveland, because Cleveland invents rock and roll.
And he was pretty big back in the time, because even when I was making the video, I could Google something on YouTube. If you Google him on YouTube, you can find his old TV shows.
So after he does that, he starts having big concerts.
Yep.
And I think one of the things on his tombstones is one of the concerts he had. One of the first rock and roll concert was in Cleveland. Then he gets hired by bigger TV shows. He kind of does a lot of what Dick Clark does with the American Bandstand.
Yep.
But Alan Freed's career is ruined with he is part of the scandal where he's paid by certain record labels to play their artists' records.
Right.
And he does it. And so it's a huge scandal. He's discredited in the community. He's totally ruined, and he ends up dying young of, again, alcoholism.
Yeah.
So, and his name is very tarnished, where people don't associate Alan Freed with the same type of stardom as Dick Clark.
Right.
Even though it's really Alan Freed who sets the stage for Dick Clark.
Yeah.
So, but Alan Freed, unfortunately, that scandal just
and just if you're less interested in the historical aspect, and let's say you live in the Cleveland area and you're going there, the tombstone is just amazing. It looks like a big jukebox.
It looks like a big jukebox.
It's really, really neat. It stands out just because it's not your typical headstone. It literally it's like about the size of what a jukebox would be. It's gigantic.
And you can see it from Elliot Ness's. And for us, we weren't really expecting to go to his grave.
Yep.
But because we could see it from Elliot Ness's grave, and it was
so
neat, we walked over and we like, and you can basically read his story on the tombstone.
Yeah.
Now, I had read also that he wasn't originally buried there, and then his ashes went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a long time.
Yeah.
And then the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame asked for them to remove his ashes, and his family put him in Lakeview Cemetery.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know what that's all about, but that's kind of what happened there.
Yeah. Now, there were some other ones, and I'm trying to remember.
So of course we do Carl Stokes. He's that first mayor of a major city. He's the first black mayor of Cleveland.
Yeah.
And we go to his grave. We go to Garrett Morgan's grave. He was an inventor, the three-way traffic light and gas masks.
Yes, that's right.
I think
was pretty neat. And he's African American.
He's African American as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
So think about that. Let's pause really quick on that. Right. Traffic lights.
Yes.
Like this guy invented traffic lights, red, yellow, green.
Yes.
Like thing that everybody knows nowadays.
Every
Everybody
day.
associates those colors with, go, stop, and slow down.
Or
right?
speed up.
Or road rage, or what have you, whatever city that you're living in. This guy,
Garrett Morgan,
invented that, as well as gas masks.
Masks.
Talk about two completely opposite things.
Safety, very safety.
Yeah, that's true.
Wise.
Very safety oriented. But gas masks. So do we remember when he?
No, but they're very like premature gas masks, like the basic, they're precursor.
Precursor to what would actually be used probably
today.
in war and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But that was just like
such
neat. A random, super interesting. And he was kind of a little bit further away from some of the main
So this
folks.
is a big cemetery. It's 235 acres.
Yeah, it was gigantic.
It's a very big cemetery. So you have to know where you're going. You have to get a map.
Yeah.
You have to kind of plot out the graves. Like even for Garrett Morgan, I remember we have his section and lot number, but we had to walk around and look for a little bit.
We had to look around for a little while.
We go to Salisbury.
So I was going to ask, was that where
Dr.
Salisbury?
Yeah.
So this is like the Salisbury steak guy. So
Yeah.
if you go and watch our video, and the video link will be in the podcast, notes description here. I kind of show like a quick picture of like, hey, what's a Salisbury steak again?
Yeah.
If you're not a big meat eater or whatever, right? But this is the guy that came up with the Salisbury, or this is, it was named after him.
It was named after him. So he's a doctor who starts to see the benefits of a meat-centered diet. So basically he sees the benefits of high protein, right? And so the Salisbury steak is named after him.
Wasn't he Scottish or something like that?
I think so. But it's basically just a steak with gravy. Yeah. Basically back in the day when steaks were really dry, because you can imagine just cooking them over like kind of spit or something, the way to make them edible was probably to put some kind of gravy on them and to eat them. So thank you.
Put some of the extra juices on them. Yeah.
But no, one of the bigger graves we saw was, of course, John D. Rockefeller.
Yeah. His grave is huge.
It's huge. He has a huge obelisk.
Yeah.
And he's buried, I think it's so funny, he's buried beside his mother and his wife.
Yeah, shocker.
Right between them.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, and you know what I didn't know that you taught me while we were there is there was all this money laying around.
Money. And I'm like, not just pennies.
Yeah, it's like dollar bills.
Dollar
like 20s,
bills. Yeah, people leave money on his grave. And they do that because there's a superstition that if you leave money on Rockefeller's grave, your personal money will multiply the way Rockefeller's money multiplied.
Yeah.
But Rockefeller, I mean, he made his money in a way that I say this on the video. You can't make your money today.
No.
He monopolized Standard Oil.
Yeah.
He cut out all middlemen. He overpriced so middlemen couldn't afford transportation. And then once he owned all the oil, he could jack up the prices.
Yeah. And so, and again, I didn't really understand this until I started making the video. When Jen says monopolize the oil industry, it was a true and legitimate monopoly.
Yeah.
I show a picture of, because the U.S. government eventually they broke up Standard Oil.
They won't let you do that anymore. Yeah, because it's not fair to.
And so there's a tree.
market.
So there's a picture, right? There's a picture kind of showing like when Standard Oil was broken up into 3 or 4 things, and then 3 or 4 things from each of those, and then all the big name companies, Exxon, Mobil, all those, they all were born from Standard Oil.
Yes.
If you look at that video, pause it on that section and just look at what Standard Oil was, everything that came from it, and you'll see all the big name oil companies today. You're like, oh my gosh, he basically owned like the entire world's supply.
Yes.
And supplied oil to the entire world at the time.
Yes, he did. And it doesn't support free market. It doesn't support.
Not at all. That's a smidge of a monopoly.
Yeah. But he tries to make good, right? So Rockefeller goes, I'll buy these 22 acres in Manhattan, and I'll build all these buildings, and I'll make it so I'm doing something good for society, and we'll build Rockefeller Center, and we'll build 30 Rock, and we'll build a bunch of different buildings.
So that show 30 Rock, that's 30 Rockefeller
Center. Yeah, it's him.
Yeah,
it's him. So it's very interesting. He lives to be very old too. He lives to be 98 years old.
Yeah, I mean, talk about just a guy who just won't quit in every single way.
He was the first billionaire in the U.S. And then, of course, we go to Garfield.
Yeah, that was cool.
James Garfield, 20th president of the United States, assassinated. He was shot in the train station in Washington, D.C. on September 18th, 1881. And he, I'm sorry. He shot July 2nd, 1881. He dies September 18th, 1881.
Yeah. And now remind me, his was the mausoleum. We didn't get to go inside.
Yes. Because of COVID, you couldn't go inside.
And it's a large, it's a huge monument. I would love to go back and get a chance to go inside.
I mean, at the time it was like 135,000. It took 9 years to build. So he dies in 1881. Like most presidents, he lays in state at the Rotunda in the Capitol. Then he goes on, again, like a funeral train tour. Same thing they did with Lincoln.
Yeah.
And he's back to Cleveland. And then he's at Lakeview in a vault and he's kept there for 9 years until they build this mausoleum, and it's huge. We saw it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Stained glass windows.
It's gorgeous from the outside. We weren't allowed to go inside.
We went inside, and there's a big 12-foot marble statue of him inside, and he's buried there beside his wife. Well, they're not even buried; they're entombed.
Yeah.
So their coffins are visible with their American flag on his coffin.
And in the video, I show some pictures right that are publicly available online. So so if you watch the video, you can kind of see what it looks like inside. If you ever want to go visit for yourself, I'd go back just to visit.
Yeah, it's really neat. But he's an interesting president because he's basically killed more or less by his doctors.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they keep, this is before washing your hands. This is for using gloves. Yeah. This is for sterilizing instruments. So because he's shot in the back and it goes into his abdomen, doctors keep trying to check for the bullet.
Because they never got it out.
They never got it out. And they keep trying to get it out and they can't quite find it. And they keep sticking dirty instruments and dirty fingers. He dies of blood poisoning, gangrene. And so the defense of his assassin is that I shot him, but I didn't kill him.
That's right. That's right.
So that's what he says.
And he was actually, and I didn't realize it, he was actually a pretty popular president when he was elected. Mm-hmm. Like he was very popular.
So he was a general in the Civil War. Yeah. He's a great orator. What an amazing speaker.
Yeah.
And he was well educated. He was taught at Hiram College, and that's what some of the murals on the side of the mausoleum have him being a teacher, being a professor.
Yep.
So, and he was very well liked. And that's, at the time, the two sides couldn't decide on a president. Yeah. And they both kind of dug in their heels. And then someone said, well, what about Garfield? And I was like, yeah. Yep. So that's basically how he won the presidency. They called him the dark horse because no one expected him to win. And then he won. Yeah,
he was like the one person that everybody could agree upon. Like, yeah, actually, I think he'd be pretty good. Yeah. Like, we really don't like these other two, but he'd be pretty good.
Yeah. So that's how he won.
Yeah.
So that was neat, and I wanted to see that. So that was very important. And this was the first time that we had brought the kids with us, and my middle son really took an interest because we had spoken about a school tragedy.
Yeah, that's right.
There was a monument.
That's right.
169 children were killed in a fire in 1908 at a school in Cleveland, and there was a monument to them. So I was talking about that, and my middle son was very interested in that.
Well, and I didn't realize that particular event, again, that happened in Ohio.
Yes.
But it was the reason that they changed a lot of safety codes
in
schools, right? And part of what happened was that all the kids were trying to rush out of this cafeteria, and the doors swung inwards.
Yes.
And not outwards. And obviously they were panicking. They didn't realize this. And so now, if you ever go into a space like that, all doors in large auditoriums like that, they all swing out, and that was because of this tragedy.
Yeah, and it was very, of course, a lot of safety protocols born of tragedy.
Yeah,
and that was one of them, and that's a lot of children.
Yeah,
so it was a pretty sad thing, and of course, my son took interest in that, and so we had to talk about that, of course, but I think one of the other graves we see here is Devereaux.
Oh, yes.
So that's just something that always stuck out in my mind as those three characters walking home from the American Revolution. There's a famous painting, and I just had always seen it recreated.
Yeah.
Right?
So again, most people listening to this, because I had no idea.
Sure.
Right. And I'm not sure you even did. I mean, you may have because you're super smart, but most folks won't know Devereaux. They won't even trying to describe the painting of the three men walking kind of across a battlefield, one kind of drumming.
One carrying the American flag. And one kind of injured playing the flute.
Right. And it's been recreated.
Like Mickey, Donald, and Goofy recreated it. Yep. I think they recreated a lot like in just cartoons and stuff.
And again, we show the pictures on the video. But it was just so neat. So Devereaux was one of the models.
One of the models for the painting.
Yeah.
The original painting.
Just kind of, again, such a random aside for such a pretty famous painting.
Yeah.
Right. Again, it's been recreated and reacted and, across cartoons and all sorts of stuff. If you look it up online or if you watch our video, you'll recognize it. You'll be like, oh, yeah, I've seen that before. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, again, this was such a fun one to do because it was unexpectedly just a nice afternoon. This was the first time that I thought of local cemeteries as places to visit, and the first time outside of Arlington National Cemetery that I viewed a city cemetery as more of an afternoon destination on a nice day, because you never know who might be resting right in your hometown. So again, thank you to those Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast, and please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. That's talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think today's topic would be interesting. Shoot them a text, tell them look it up, Talk with History podcast, or better yet, just send them a direct link to today's episode, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We will talk to you next time.
Thank you.